Good evening. This is the first Wednesday in January, so tonight our new classes are theoretically beginning. Now, as far as the adult choices, in the auditorium class we'll be studying Ezekiel, but that won't start till next week. The previous class is concluding tonight. And in room 4, Gil is starting a class on godly men and women. Those are the options. If you're a younger person, you probably already know where your class is, so we'll be departing for class after the prayer. About the only announcement I want to make is that Sunday at 2 o'clock is the service for Jesus Aviles at the Woods Mobile Home Park. I did get that correct, did I not? Yes. The invitation tonight will be given by Chris Rice, and then Julio Alvarado will lead us in prayer before we go to class. Chris.
Romans 14:11. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then each of us will give an account of himself to God. That is a scripture that this song that I'm going to read to you is based out of. Song is, what will your answer be? Someday you'll stand at the bar on high. Someday your record you'll see. Someday you'll answer the question of life. What will your answer be? Sadly, you'll stand if you're unprepared. Trembling, you'll fall on your knee. Facing the sentence of life or of death. What will the sentence be? Now is the time to prepare, my friend. Make your soul spotless and free, washed in the blood of the crucified one. He will your answer be. What will it be? What will it be? Where will you spend your eternity? What will it be? Or what will it be? What will your answer be? If you're subject to the invitation, come forward as we stand and sing.
What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. This is all my hope and peace, nothing but the blood of Jesus. This is all my righteousness, nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus.
Let us pray. Dear loving and amazing Lord, thank you for this new year. Thank you for this hour together as a church family where we can learn more about your word. Thank you for the teachers who spent many hours preparing the material. Please help the sick ones, the ones that are traveling, or those that just couldn't make it tonight. In your Son's name, amen.
Am I on? Yes? Yeah, I'm on. Good evening. If you're here for Ezekiel, disappointment is a part of life. If you've been in this Joshua class, I told you for the last several weeks what? I was going to get one more week. Remember I said we had our singing last Wednesday night, and I got one more week because Kyle is out of town. So if you were expecting Ezekiel tonight, I apologize. Don't be aggravated. Your patience will be rewarded, Lord willing, in another week. And we'll get started in Ezekiel. And I was thinking about that on the way over, driving over here. And we're through the book of Joshua, and what we're basically doing tonight. In fact, I think it was Brady. I think you and I were having a conversation a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about class. And I had made the comment. I said, a good class is not me standing up here talking for 45 minutes, even though that's pretty much generally what I do. But a good class is where everybody is participating and sharing their knowledge, and then we grow and we learn together, yes? And so tonight, because if you remember over the last couple weeks, I said when we get to the end of this book, what I'm going to want us to do is to kind of take everything that we've learned in the book of Joshua, and I think we can all freely admit how we've learned a lot. There are a lot of lessons to apply, not just to the nation of Israel back there in the 14th BCE century, okay, but there's obviously lessons for us today as Christians that we need to garner from and apply to our lives. And I told you, I said, when we get to this week, and I'm going to call on you, I hope you came prepared. So, but I want to hear, I don't want to stand up here for 45 minutes and talk and tell you, I wrote a few things down I'm willing to share with you that I garner from the book of Joshua, but what I'm leaning on tonight is to hear from you. So you're going to be the teacher and I'm going to be the student, okay? So you could tell me and share with the others, all right? But want to get everybody as much as possible engaged tonight so we can talk about it as a group. Now, Steve went over a lot of stuff in those first 3 months or so and that first half of the book, and I went over quite a bit of stuff, but You know, when we look at the book of Joshua in the historical setting, what the book essentially does is it starts, basically when we get to Deuteronomy, we have the end of Moses' life, his death, and we know according to Deuteronomy that what's written for us, that Joshua is to be his successor. He is to pick up the mantle and continue to run with it, leading God's people to where? To the promised land, to Canaan, something that had been promised all the way back to their original forefather Abraham back in Genesis 15. So this is a promise that has come, taken a while, but this is God's timeline, okay? This isn't man's timeline, this is God's timeline in finally fulfilling that promise. And so when we get to the book of Joshua, we begin with, again, Moses is gone. We have the life of Joshua. We had mentioned before that I've seen in reading different chronologies that some scholars think Joshua takes over a period of about 25 to 30 years. I've seen some scholars push that back to 45 to 50 years. That if we just split the difference and say maybe somewhere between 35 and 40 years of time within this book of Joshua, and we know that Joshua dies at the age of 110 years old, what we're essentially looking at is the last third of Joshua's life. But even when we consider Joshua's life as a whole, and we discussed that a little bit a few weeks ago, how would you describe his life as a whole, considering everything that he saw, everything that he witnessed, everything that he experienced? Because obviously he was born into what? Was he born a free man? He was born under bondage. And then, of course, as he grew into a man, and then we have Moses come on the scene, we have Moses leading the children of Israel by the power of God and those miracles and those wonders that were wrought on by Moses through God that delivers the Israelites out of the bondage of Egypt through the plagues, through the Red Sea, through the wilderness, through the water given, through the manna and the quail, the ups and the downs, and the entering into the promised land, and only one of two men bringing back a positive report on the land itself, and then wandering for 40 years in the wilderness, continuing on and on until Moses dies, and now he is in charge, he is to succeed, and we come to the plains of Moab, and then we, again by another miracle, cross over the river Jordan to confront, would you say, a very well-fortified army, different armies and city-states that had chariots and large armies and defenses that Israel probably wasn't quite used to dealing with, according to what we've read previously. Didn't mean that they battled and they engaged, but certainly a much tougher and higher scale enemy that was presented to them in the land of Canaan. And he's seen all these, and the wars and the efforts that were conducted throughout the book of Joshua, which we think that first initial battle and conquest of the land took probably 7 or 8 years, and battle after battle, victory after victory, from Jericho all the way up into the defeat of the northern territories to the north there. Victory after victory. Maybe I've already done it myself by talking, but again, how would you sum up his life? And he led, yeah, he did. He was a man as God had instructed him in the first chapter of Joshua to be what? To be strong and to be courageous. And if there were two words, I think there are many words that we could use to describe Joshua, but if we were to pick two words, I think that's a good start. When we look at Joshua, he was a man of strength and he was a man of courage, and they essentially do go hand in hand. And so we see this. And so as we look at this man Joshua leading Israel, and interesting, and you might get into this maybe when we talk about applications for us today as Christians, but the word Joshua is rooted from the word that is salvation in the Hebrew, and just really kind of the Greek way of saying Joshua is Jesus. So his name meaning salvation, that what? He is the one that leads God's people to what? To salvation, to the promised land, which essentially makes him a shadow or a type, I mean, I think that's where the writer in Hebrews 4 is going to. I hope I'm not taking any of the points that you're going to be making. But this is what we see, and I think one of the many allures of the book to us as Christians is we see this is the payoff. This is God's promise being fulfilled. This is what other writers in the Old Testament, in Micah and Zechariah, would say, that it was every man under his own under his own vine and fig tree. That this was what? This represented the blessings of God, the divine blessings, the peace. All those things that God had promised, this is what we see him fulfilled, and he fulfills it through the leadership that we see in Joshua. So, that's kind of the summary of the book. What do you gather from it? What is important to you? What do you take from this book to apply to you today? Because there's a lot of things that we talked about. There's faithfulness. That faith requires what? God will keep his promises. Two things there. God keeps his promises. I mean, that's obviously something important for us, because as you begin there in Joshua chapter 1, reminding him to be strong and courageous, and for the children of Israel to be strong and courageous, God reminds them that what? All the promises that he has fulfilled and that he will continue to fulfill. And that is a record that is ever present before us throughout the book of Joshua. Joshua chapter 21, Joshua chapter 1, Joshua chapter 3, Joshua chapter 24. So God keeps his promises. God is faithful. And let me say this. Hopefully I don't get sidetracked. Okay, so God keeps his promises. Okay? I think of that, and then you move to the section of Joshua chapters 13 through 21. And we didn't spend a lot of time in those chapters. We spent a little bit of time, but particularly in those chapters, 13 through 21, that deals with what? What is being done in those chapters? It's the allotment of the land, right? It's the distribution of the land. Now, again, Steve, that first half of the book, man, he's got those stories. He's got, the ones that we're most familiar with, right? I mean, those are the big stories. I mean, we're talking the crossing of the River Jordan. We're talking about Jericho and Ai and the renewal of the covenant at Shechem, and it goes on. And then we get to this section. So you got all these big stories that most of us are familiar with. We know them well. And then you get to chapters 13 through 21. You go from these big, important stories to now it almost goes back to like reading Leviticus. It's very Levitical in reading. Would you say that? Because what do you have listed in those chapters? You got names and clans and families and places and boundaries. And you must admit, it's a lot of detail, right? And I would just say this for our benefit, you and I together. So, some people might look at these chapters and want to skip over them and not read it. They might look at it and say, well, these chapters just seem to be irrelevant, or maybe they're a little pedantic. They're just too much in detail and it doesn't apply to us. But you go back to this idea of what Stan said about God fulfilling his promises. How much nuance and detail is in those chapters? It's very specific, isn't it? Very detailed. What does that show or demonstrate when it comes to God's promises? Confidence. Will he leave any aspect or part of his promise undone, no matter how small it might be?
When I'm unsure, I write very vague things, get very waffly. Give me wiggle room.
I like wiggle room too. So, no, understandable. But if we go through and we read those names and we think, okay, well, this isn't really relevant to us, let me tell you something. It was relevant enough that God recorded every one of those names down. Every one of those clans, every one of those families, all of those places and boundaries were important to him. And he recorded them so that they would know, they would see, they would understand, but just not them, future generations as well. It mattered to God that that was recorded and shown. Do you think it mattered to the Israelites? Those names, their names being mentioned, those places, because those places reflected what? Their inheritance. You've ever gotten an inheritance from somebody? You ever had to sit down at the disclosure of a will, or a family trust, and you knew you were going to be getting something in that will, that trust, some sort of inheritance? Did you take an interest in that inheritance? Was it important that you got your piece of the pie? What was coming to you? This was important to Israel, to those families, because this is what had been promised. Go back to Joshua 13 with Caleb, and Caleb's like, hey, I'm 85 years old, but I'm still going to claim what is mine. Hebron is mine. God promised it to me. I've been faithful. I'm going to go take what God has promised to me. It was important to him. If it matters to God, and if it mattered to them, and it's been recorded for us, brothers and sisters, it should matter to us too. So when you get to sections like this, you think, oh, we'll just read over and skip that. Don't do it, because you're doing a disservice to the book, to God, to the message, and what he is communicating to us. And that is when we get back to fulfilling promises. He doesn't fail, and he fulfills that promises, and nothing is left undone. That's how God operates. And then that takes us to the next. Because God operates in that fashion, that should increase what, as you said? Our faith, right? And to me, as I think of faith, how did Israel demonstrate their faith in Joshua? What did they do? Say it louder, Orrin. Yeah. But would you say taking action? Faith in action? Yeah, you move forward to the account there in Hebrews 11, right? And it tells us, 30 verses 30 and 31, that by faith, that what did the Israelites do? They marched around Jericho 7 times, and what happened? The walls fell. Rahab, by faith, did what? She took in the spies, right? And then James says when it was time for them to leave, she sent them in a different direction, okay, according to James. Hebrews tells us, as we look at that record, right, of faith, a faith that saves is a faith that does. It's faith in action. And as you move from 11 into chapter 12, that's why the writer could say, therefore we have this great cloud of witnesses, right? Every one that's been listed in chapter 11, that should what? Inspire us, motivate us to what? Cast off what's holding us up, the sin that entangles us, and then in turn we focus on Jesus. That's what we do, and that's what our faith does. It is faith in action. And when proper faith is demonstrated, like we see in the book of Joshua, who defeats them? What army is superior to them? What enemy can desolate them? No one. And so that's why we see Joshua as what? This is the promise fulfilled. This is the inheritance. I mean, this is it. This is what they had been aiming for and striving for. So we've talked about God fulfilling his promises. We've talked about the importance of faith in our lives. What else? Yes, Paul.
At the beginning of the book, so many obstacles.
Yeah? Let me love the point. and maybe add to it or expand or just add a thought to it or ask you this. So do you see when we look at Joshua and the nation of Israel and the example that we have, the stories there, could we also say that we, as what I'm hearing from you, that we also see it as mimicking or similar to how we live our lives as Christians from this standpoint? Is it challenging being a Christian? Can we sometimes be overwhelmed by our choices and decisions? Okay. Think of Israel. They've been redeemed from the bondage of Egypt, right? And they're led out into the wilderness, and it's there that they are learning how to live a life in fellowship with God. Now, how well does that go? Sometimes good. Is it rocky? Are there some issues and problems, right? And here they are asked to have enough faith in God as God continues to daily graciously provide for them. And then you get right up into the promised land, and again they're asked to muster enough faith to confront an enemy, again, who's large. Not just large as far as size and fortified cities. Were there large people there too? Well, there were some big people there, right? Even large in stature. And they're asked to put faith in God and to continue to march forward and to engage the enemy. And you think that, I think sometimes we're so quick to just lash out at Israel and go, oh, they lacked faith. How could they be so foolish? How could they be so arrogant? How could they be so rebellious? Well, if we're honest with ourselves, we relate to Israel pretty well as individuals and people, because there are times in our lives where do we not suffer the same things? I know I can say that about me in my struggles, but they're asked to have that faith in order to what? To engage, to move forward. And did they have challenges? Did they have obstacles? Did they fail at times? Is that sometimes what Christians do? I'm thinking, yes, Jay, and then Glenn.
To go along with that, we used to have an ambiguous term of faith, but when specifically talking about Joshua and Caleb, perseverance.
Yep.
We talked about going from slave to being a leader of a conquering people and the establishment of a country. Two of the three promises Abraham, God, he fulfilled, and it was a choice every single day. He was a leader. He was a spy. They didn't pick kids to go spy out the land. He was already a leader.
No, he was, yeah. Caleb said he was 40. So
he was already a chief, and people were going to listen to him then. All through being basically the aide-de-camp of Joshua during the wandering. And there was no retirement in God's service with him.
no.
Through his old age, and through Caleb, his fighting giants in his old age, hills. It's a lesson of perseverance, just not actively fulfilling what God wants you.
Yeah, that's a good word to use, perseverance, because we've already referenced Hebrews 11 once, but when you go back, and I would suggest you do, read Hebrews 10, 11, and 12. And what are those three chapters about? It's about a perseverance of faith. That's exactly what those three chapters are about, why they can use the example like the children of Israel and Rahab and Joshua in Hebrews chapter 11. Yes, Glenn. Mm-hmm. exactly. Yeah. We talk, and a lot of these things, what we're talking about, these points are kind of interwoven, but again, it's about obedience. It's about staying on top of it, right? Staying in the obedience. It's about a focus on God. That's why, again, he says, as you reference there in verse 8, that the book of law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate upon it, day and night, that it's ever presence. God and his law and what we are required to do should always be on the forefront of our mind. And if it is continually in our mind, that should help us to then do what? Put it into action, right? Chris, go ahead. Yeah, I think that's 663 maybe? 64, 68, in the 60s there, yeah.
What intelligent choice?
Well, we have a lot of choices, but there's only one right choice.
It's just
Yeah.
the way I see Joshua.
Yeah. And I don't think you can give a greater compliment to Joshua that when you conclude there in chapter 24 and it talks about his death, he dies at 110 years old, and in chapter 24 it refers to him as Joshua, the servant of the Lord. That's the same title that is given to Moses back in Deuteronomy chapter 34 at Moses' death. It is stated that Moses, the servant of the Lord. And so to me, this is a man who, when we talk about faith, when we talk about leadership skills and trust, he's a man that in many respects was like Moses and was the right man to succeed him and to finish the job of taking them into the promised land and to reach that fulfillment. Bill, did you have your hand raised? No? But I'm sure you want to say something. No? Okay. And something else. I'm doing way more talking than I wanted to, but you all probably kind of knew that already. So, okay, yes.
I wasn't in the class, but what parallels do you find with Joshua's farewell speech and Moses' farewell speech?
Okay, well, what I would do is first say that Moses' farewell speech is the book of Deuteronomy. Like the whole book, because it's a series of farewell speeches. And so, to me, chapter 24 for Joshua's farewell speech it's really just kind of a shortened, abbreviated version of what Moses does in the book of Deuteronomy. Maybe this might not be the best example, but I've always told people, if you want to study the book of Isaiah, where's the best place to start? For me, start in Micah, because they're contemporaries, and Micah says what Isaiah says. He just says it in 7 chapters instead of 66 chapters. You might not necessarily completely agree with that, but that's how I look at it. Okay, but what we have here is basically his succession of farewell speeches that are just kind of condensed into really two. You got chapter 23, which he addresses to the leaders, and then chapter 24, which he addresses to all the nations. But I would also say that if you want to talk about farewell speeches that you can compare this to, I would think about Paul's farewell speech to the elders at Ephesus in Acts chapter 20 and his departing words to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4. I think those are ones that you can also look at and draw a lot of parallels with. And again, it boils down to what? You have faith and you rely on God. That's what you do. Yes?
Yeah, one of the things I noticed with those farewell speeches, and even with Paul's farewell speeches, nothing changed.
No.
Nothing changed. There was nothing added to what the nation needs to do. There's nothing taken away of what the nation needs to do. There's warnings, there's encouragements, there's all these things which should tell us something as Christians that, all of last year, what did we cover? An unchanging God.
Yeah.
God
So-
doesn't change. Whether you entered the promised land, receive the blessing that you seek, doesn't mean you stop.
No.
God doesn't change.
No.
At the very end, Joshua and
Because
Judges.
if we go to Hebrews 4, we're striving for the rest, right? We don't stop our work. We're always abounding in the work of the Lord. That's what 1 Corinthians 15 says. But let me just, because you talk about farewell, and thinking about Paul, I tell you what, turn over to 2 Timothy 4 real quick. Just because we're talking about parallels and making these connections, but if you consider for a moment, these are the final words of Paul that we have, period, not just to Timothy. This is his last recorded letter that we have. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning there in verse 5, but you, speaking to Timothy, but you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Does that kind of sound familiar to what Joshua has been talking to Israel about? About what? Being faithful, being obedient, do your duty, okay? And then verse 6, for I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. There's the rest that we're shooting for. But what's interesting in thinking about that, and these being, again, Paul's final words to Timothy, and we're talking about what is Paul emphasizing to Timothy. Go to the opening of the letter in 2 Timothy chapter 1, and notice what he says there in verse 13 and 14, and see the connections with Joshua. Verse 13, 2 Timothy chapter 1, hold fast the pattern of sound words which you have heard from me in faith and love which are in Christ Jesus, that good thing which was committed to you, keep by the Holy Spirit who dwells in you. So Paul, in his final letter to Timothy, is saying, Timothy, you need to do what?
Retain the standard.
Retain the standard. That pattern, that teaching, that what? You've been given. Who gave it to him? Paul did. Paul received it by direct revelation. But Paul's saying, you need to retain the standard. You need to do what you know is true, what's right, what you've been taught, and you do it all the way to the end. How's that different than Joshua? Is it different? Because what is Joshua? What's the Lord through Joshua telling him to do? What? Retain the standard? Follow the pattern? Follow the law? Somebody else had their hand. Glenn, did you have your hand raised again?
I did, but I see something else in the book. That's how God takes care of.
Yes, he does. That's right. Absolutely. If you think of it, Glenn, speak it out. I know what you did. You had your hand raised, and then I went off a tangent and then got you, and then got... That's, I completely understand. So, anyone else? Yes, Brady.
I'll do an odd negative one.
Oh,
And that is, Joshua was an amazing leader. This is the man who was chosen to succeed Moses. When God said, I speak to him differently than anyone
That's right.
else. Speak to him face to face. And there's someone coming like Moses, you look for him. So the fact that Joshua was chosen says something about his character. Yet, an important thing for a leader is to realize there's only so much I can do. Because it says that in the end of the book, that they served, Israel served the Lord during the time of Joshua and the elders. But when you get over to Judges 17, everyone did what was right in their own sight. It all fell apart, if you will. Paul, who did the whole fight, good fight, etc., warned the Ephesian elders, after I leave, grievous wolves are going to enter the flock.
And coming from among
coming from among the elders.
them, yes, from among them.
So leader has to do their responsibility. They can be a great leader. There comes a point in time though where they have to realize, I can only do so much, and people are able to make decisions.
Yeah.
And go off on their own.
And that's the question that we're not going to get sidetracked and try to answer this because it takes us down a little bit different road. But, that's a question that I've kind of always asked myself is you have Joshua, right? You have the elders. I think we could be in agreement. You have an incredible generation here. No, they weren't perfect, but, again, this is a success story here in Joshua from what they're doing. God fulfills His promises. They show their faith and trust in God, the faith and the courage. And they go through, and the book ends, and everybody's in agreement. We're going to serve the Lord. Even Joshua says, not so fast. You say you can, but you better be committed to it. Because you can't, and he says, that's why he says, get rid of those idols. And to me, I've always asked the question, it's amazing how you go then to the book of Judges, that generation dies, and then the next generation says what? They do not know God. That's like, where, and that, we can admit that's a catastrophic failure. Where? It's like, how did it happen? It's like, it's one, but that just goes to show you how quick does it take to fall off? Not very long.
But also a leader to save wear and tear on themselves and to keep their ego in check needs to remember it's not all me.
No, it's not.
It is not all me. And people can make a decision. That doesn't mean I didn't do my job.
No, and
they can make choices.
And when we look back and we reflect on Moses' life, he went through that same process as well because got to the point it about pounded him into fine dirt. So it was wearing on him. Chris.
Just as people tend to stand on the facts of wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously there was not someone waiting in the wings after Joshua to, continue that leadership, and it's obviously reflected in Judges. So. They did. Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's foreign to them.
Well, but it also makes you wonder how much their faith based on what they saw.
Yeah.
They literally saw promise. This new generation.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Glenn, did you have your hand raised? Well, when you reference Hebrew 4, what it's going to, part of that equation is that we don't have the disbelief that Israel did in Hebrews as it goes through into detail in Hebrews 3 and 4. So as far as when we look at the formula. So I don't want to pick on anybody, but Steve's been awful quiet.
Well, everyone's comments have been very good. I wanted to get you to talk about something real quick.
I have done so much talking over the last 3 months, but yeah, go ahead.
Early in the class, I think
This class or mean like
this class.
this class? Okay.
No, not tonight.
Okay. Back in October.
About the monuments that are
Mm-hmm.
I think you said there were 4. I think that's probably right. What was it?
I think there's the one at the end that they raised. There's the one in 21 when they built the altar. There's the one crossing the Jordan. I want to say there's 5.
But this kind of goes.
I'll have to go through and look. If somebody could look that up, though, and give us I want to say there's at least 5. There might be more than 5.
It kind of goes back to what Paul
Okay.
was talking about
No.
a minute ago,
Well,
because the next generation didn't know, but, Joshua was trying to set monuments up so future generations, he was trying to help them remember
no.
what God did.
So what you're doing is you're bringing forth a point that I had told myself, but I'm like, I'm not going to get into it tonight because it'll be such a. But since you've brought it up, okay. So Paul, do you remember back when we were doing this, and we did Joshua 3 and 4, and we talked what did we call that? And we're getting old.
Those little tag team talks,
Yeah, what do we call those?
let's call them that.
They were so great. Obviously, we can't remember the title. Text talk. Thank you. See, that's why we got Ken. Text talk. And we did one on Joshua 3 and 4, and it was the importance of memorials, right? And where we kind of led off in that discussion is we started in Joshua 3 and 4, and the point that, at least that I was trying to make, and I was going to bring it up tonight, but I was like, well, I know we're going to have a lot of the points, but since you brought it up, one of the questions I was going to ask you all, and we got time for a minute to discuss it, is, do you have a memorial? You might ask, well, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by a memorial? We have the Lord's Supper. That's obviously a memorial. Do you have anything else in your life that's there to serve you as a remembrance of the importance of your relationship and your faith in God? Who? Could it be somebody? Could be something. Yeah. And remember, we're not talking about an idol here. Okay, this is not an ephod that we're turning into an idol. Don't think that. Okay. But like, for example, like when we were in that text talk, I was talking like a memorial, somebody that I look to personally, and I go, okay, this is somebody who was important in my life in helping develop me as a person and as a Christian. And I'm thankful. I have a lot of people. But the one that I mentioned last was, and I just mentioned her because I went to a funeral last Saturday. My great uncle had passed away, and they were showing, that was my grandpa Al's younger brother Leon, and they were showing old pictures of them growing up as all 6 siblings there. And I saw pictures of my great grandmother Annie. That's my niece Annie that goes here. She's named after my great grandmother Annie. That's our great grandmother. That's my grandfather Al's mother. And she's a memorial to me in the sense that her husband died, I think Ken was 37, 36. He might have been 34 or 35, but he had a heart, same thing that Elijah had, correct? I don't think they know what. They don't know. Okay. But a heart, he died when he was, this is back in the early 40s, 35, 36 years old, and leaves behind a wife and 6 kids. 6 kids. And my great-grandmother Annie raised her 6 kids. She worked job after job. Those kids, my grandfather had to grow up fast and become the father because he was the oldest. But she dressed those kids, fed those kids, provided for those kids, and those 6 kids didn't miss church. And they ended up being faithful all their lives. To me, I looked at her and I go, that's a memorial to me. That's somebody who I look at. And again, like, please don't impeach the sincerity where I'm coming from. I don't worship her. It's not that. But I look at her, I think of Hebrews 11 when it talks about Abel, though he's what? He's been gone a long time. What still speaks? His blood, it still speaks today. His example of faith still speaks. It still teaches. And I look at somebody like my great-grandmother Annie, and I go, her lesson speaks to me. And I look at her and I go, that lady was important. You know, she died when I was about 20 years old, but she was important to me. I saw it firsthand and heard the stories as well. And not just her, but I have lots of people like that in my life to thank. You know, I do. You want to talk about a thing? I've got my grandfather Dowell's old King James Bible. I love it because he used it so much it fell apart. And then you know what he did after that? He didn't throw it away. He rebound it with duct tape. So it's got duct tape on the back of it. Why? It was used. And I look, and he's got all kinds of notes, and I can't even read because he's, you know, I thought my handwriting, he had a lot of shakes and things, but I look at his notes, and I go, but I look at that Bible, and it's a reminder. You know, it's not an idol to me, but it's a memorial. It's a reminder of me of those things that are important. Somebody had their hand raised. I'm sorry. Lynn, was it you? Because I'm doing a really good job of not calling on you.
Do you think that, I heard this expression somewhere, and I can't remember, about altars of sacrifice
Okay.
instead of memorial. But I think of Abraham, first to meet David, he left on his journey, and it came in with set up some stones, memorial. Altars of sacrifice seem to be more applicable to us. That's what we bring.
Yeah, well, I think of Romans 12:1, right? The living sacrifice. So, but and again, that's talking about our life to God. But a memorial is different. But again, I do think they have place. Of course, the memorial we should always think of and know and observe weekly is the Lord's Supper. Of course, that memorial is there for us. But I'm just saying that there have been people and there have been events in all of your past that have shaped you, that have motivated you. And, you know, God has a book of remembrance, right? I don't think it'd be a bad idea for us to have a book of remembrance, too, of the things that have shaped us. And the things that have undone us at time, too. We've got to learn from those things as well. But we're talking about a memorial, those things that what should help us to remember and inspire us to continue in our relationship. Yes, Jay.
First, we haven't talked about Deuteronomy chapter 6. What
Please,
we're supposed to do.
go ahead.
Beginning verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, and the Lord is one. You shall love the God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your hearts. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and you shall talk of them when you sit down in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as signs on your hands, and they shall be frontals on your forehead, and you shall write them on your doorposts, on your house, and on your gate. And it shall come about when the Lord your God brings you into that land which he has sworn to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not build, and huge cisterns which you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And you eat and you were satisfied, and you watched yourselves that you did not forget the Lord who brought you from the land of Egypt out of the house of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. You shall not follow other gods and other gods.
Kind of reminds me of, yeah,
They didn't do that.
no, they didn't. You were talking about like expressions, and I thought of one I used to hear a lot when I was younger, but it was, what was that saying? It's probably some of you older would remember that, but remember the saying, but it was something like, you can't go with God and stay in the same place. You know, this is when we're talking about leading. And you know, the one thing that we know, especially when you think about Joshua 3 in verses 1 through 4, because he's instructing them that as the Ark of the Covenant with the priests moves forward, what are they to do? They're to follow it. But they're to, what? Said about 1,000 yards. You leave space, give yourself space, and you're going to see what the Lord's going to do, because he says, but the Ark leads the way, I lead the way, because you're going to a place that you've never been. You're not familiar with. And it gets back to focus on God and trusting God. We might not necessarily know the exact way or exactly, specifically where we're going, the direction it's taking us, but we do know our guide, right? We do know our guide, so we trust in him. Yes, Shane.
What Jesus said at the beginning of the book of John, he says, Peter's talking to him, I love you, Lord. He says, tend my sheep. Keep working for me. Don't stop working.
Yep.
Tend my sheep. If you love me,
Yeah, I think of there's a Revelation 14:13 where the Spirit says, blessed is the person who dies in the Lord, for he shall have rest from his labors. Okay, because again, going back to where we're going with this is we talk about the rest in Joshua, but for us, we're talking about a greater rest. You go to Hebrews. Jesus is greater than Moses, Hebrews chapter 3. You fast forward to chapter 5, Jesus is the greater high priest, the great high priest. And you sandwich that with chapter 4, and Jesus is the Savior who provides a greater eternal rest. If I could just sum that up really, really fast. It's a little more detail than that, but yeah.
I have 7 memorials, either
Seven, okay.
or heaps. You have stones and then you have
Okay.
heaps, right there.
I guess we shouldn't be shocked that there's 7.
Right.
Okay.
But
So.
the heaps are different than the stones. Different because over Achan, a heap was made, and then over the cave of Makeda, there was a
Okay. I'll have to look into it a little more.
reminders of God's wrath, of God's judgment. It goes both ways.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you for your attention. That's it. Next week, Ezekiel. So we're going to fast forward 800 years. So you should probably read from Joshua up to Ezekiel. It's probably a good idea.